Hello and welcome to the Dailies. International headlines have focused on intensifying strikes as the war on Iran enters its fifth day, with reports of new explosions in Tehran and continued Israeli and US attacks on missile sites and military infrastructure. Media outlets also highlight Iran's retaliatory drone and missile strikes across the Gulf and attacks on US and allied targets, while noting the growing regional spillover involving Lebanon and other countries. At the same time, headlines stress the global fallout, especially surging oil and gas prices and fears of wider economic disruption. The Washington Post examines the personal dimension behind President Trump's decision to strike Iran, revealing that he viewed the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei partly through the lens of alleged Iranian plots against him. The piece quotes the president, who told the ABC he acted preemptively, saying, "I got him before he got me." The report notes that while US officials cite Iranian threats as justification, no evidence links Iran to the 2024 assassination attempts against Trump, raising questions about how personal security concerns shaped the decision to go to war. The New York Times explains how the war with Iran is severely disrupting global energy flows by effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point that carries about a fifth of the world's oil. Now, using shipping data, maps and satellite imagery, the analysis shows tanker traffic collapsing as attacks and threats deter vessels. The piece warns that prolonged disruption could drive oil and gas prices indeed higher, strain global supply chains and ripple through economies worldwide. The Times also examines the emerging succession battle in Iran following the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. It highlights Mujtaba Khamenei, the late leader's son, as the leading candidate under consideration by the Assembly of Experts. The piece suggests his appointment could strengthen hardline elements closely tied to the Revolutionary Guards, while potentially provoking public backlash. It also outlines alternative candidates and underscores how leadership uncertainty adds another layer of instability to an already escalating war. The Wall Street Journal argues that concerns about the United States running out of munitions in the Iran conflict are overstated, while acknowledging the air defense stockpiles are limited and production must expand. The editorial maintains that the US has sufficient weapons for the current campaign. It frames the real challenge as long-term deterrence against adversaries such as Iran, China, and also Russia. The article calls on the Trump administration and Congress to increase defense spending, accelerate missile production, and prioritize rebuilding US military arsenals. The Wall Street Journal also focuses on Israel's strategy of targeting Iran's internal security apparatus to weaken the regime and potentially spark a popular uprising. The piece highlights airstrikes focusing on institutions such as the Revolutionary Guard, besieged militia and riot control police units responsible for suppressing protests. It notes that Israeli officials believe dismantling these structures could enable Iranians to challenge the government from within. However, analysts caution that authoritarian systems rarely collapse through air power alone, warning the strategy may underestimate the resilience of Iran's security state. Natalie Toki criticizes Europe's response to the US-Israeli war on Iran in this foreign policy argument piece, claiming European leaders sacrificed both moral credibility and political influence. She actually argues that rather than clearly condemning what she sees as an illegal attack, many European governments framed Iran as the aggressor to avoid confronting tensions between their stated commitment to international law and their alignment with Washington. Turkey also concludes that by choosing ambiguity and dependency, Europe has weakened its ability to shape diplomacy or uphold its values. The Economist, on the other hand, contends that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has emerged as the early political winner of the Iran war. The analysis explains that while the campaign relies heavily on U.S. military power, the strategy and objectives largely reflect Israeli thinking about overwhelming force and leadership decapitation. The piece suggests many Western allies are reluctantly aligning with this approach to avoid conflict with President Trump. It portrays the war as reshaping international norms, with concerns that power politics may increasingly replace legal and diplomatic constraints. Haaretz argues that while Iran has reduced its missile attacks on Israel, it is attempting to widen the conflict across the Middle East to offset its military losses. The piece actually explains that U.S. and Israeli strikes have damaged Iran's missile infrastructure, but not enough to collapse the regime. It highlights growing tensions over how long the war should continue, noting economic pressure, global energy disruptions, and also political backlash in Washington that could implicate the next phase of the campaign. The Jerusalem Post reported Israel's claim that its Air Force destroyed a secret Iranian nuclear weapons development site near Tehran, identified as Min Zadai. The piece cites the IDF, who say intelligence tracking of nuclear scientists helped uncover the facility, which was allegedly linked to weapons design rather than uranium enrichment. The report also notes that Israeli strikes have destroyed more than 300 Iranian ballistic missile launchers since the war began. And overall, it frames the attacks as part of Israel's effort to prevent Iran from rebuilding its nuclear weapons capabilities. In the UK, media coverage centred on tensions in the US-UK special relationship following Britain's initial refusal to allow American forces to use its bases for strikes on Iran. The Times reports that President Trump reacted sharply indeed, criticizing Prime Minister Keir Starmer and questioning Britain's reliability as an ally. The piece suggests the dispute reflects broader disagreements over the war's legality and strategy. Now, while cooperation later resumed, the piece notes that the episode highlights strains between Washington and London and raises questions about future stability of their historic partnership. The Telegraph examines claims that the CIA may arm Kurdish militias to pressure Iran's regime during the current war. Now, according to sources, the Trump administration is exploring support for Kurdish groups in Iraq and Western Iran as a potential ground force to exploit instability and weaken Tehran. The report notes Israel's long-standing ties with Kurdish factions and the possibility of coordinated operations. However, analysts warn that backing Kurdish militias could fragment Iran further and risk triggering civil war or broader regional instability. And we'll end with The Guardian, which explores possible outcomes for Iran following the US-Israeli bombing campaign and the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The analysis outlines 4 potential scenarios: a rapid democratic transition, a regime survival similar to Venezuela's leadership change, the Islamic Republic enduring despite damage, or a descent into civil war and fragmentation. The piece cites experts who stress that regime change appears more an aspiration than a clear strategy, warning that without a post-war plan, the conflict could produce instability rather than political transformation. That's it from us today. Thanks for watching The Dailies, only on Al Arabiya English.